No one can believe what they're seeing in a new video clip about Rick Harrison's horrible life in jail. Even though the tape starts out slowly and blurry, it's more powerful than any court testimony or primetime interview. You will not be able to take your eyes off of this video. Rick Harrison, who used to host one of the most famous reality TV shows, was shocked by this news. A lot of people thought that he would quiet down and disappear after his life sentence. A fate that many people thought he deserved. This picture, on the other hand, has made everyone curious. Is this really the end as people think? Remember to like. To keep up with this exciting story, subscribe and click the bell icon. The world got something that looked like the beginning of a scary movie instead. What they saw was a man who had lost his honor and was locked up not only by steel bars but also by his own mind. That shocked and scared a lot of people who didn't know if it was punishment or something worse. The first video that got out was posted on an anonymous dark website with the scary title, The Forgotten Pawn's Soul in Flesh. At first, a lot of people thought it was a big hoax, but then better versions started showing up on TikTok, Telegram, and finally X. It was very clear that the man in the video was Rick Harrison. Thin, dirty, and hard to recognize. The man who used to walk proudly through the halls of his famous Las Vegas pawn shop was now curled up in the corner of a crumbling jail cell, rocking slowly back and forth while holding a yellow picture of the shop that made him famous. The first leak didn't have any sound. Afterward, watchers who said they could read Rick's lips added some crude subtitles. They were never hurt, they were just forgotten in history. Once the language was broken down, the term was shared on all social networks. Some saw it as an admission of guilt, while others saw it as a sign of a total mental breakdown. And for the deeply interested crowd, it was the start of one of the scariest public events imaginable. To understand why this video has shocked the nation, you need to first understand who Rick Harrison was. The fall of a man who was born into poverty, and who had to drop out of school and was identified with epilepsy as a child. He was determined to rise above it all. He grew a small pawn shop into a huge business company and then into a TV family dynasty. His hard work, business sense, and charm were adored by millions. He was the American dream in many ways. However, that dream was ruined when rumors of tax fraud turned into something much worse after the FBI raided a storage unit connected to Rick. With disturbing images of dead bodies, fake souvenirs connected to unsolved crimes, and a list of items scrolling in code. Rick Harrison's business empire fell apart overnight. Angry former co-workers were there with him when he was arrested with cameras rolling. One of the most shocking stories of the decade was how Rick Harrison lost his job. The public had turned against him by the time his trial started. But what happened next was something that no one saw coming, even after he was found guilty. The prison video that got out wasn't part of any official probe. Not on 60 Minutes or CNN. It came from inside, supposedly from a jail guard who was fed up with the system and decided to blow the whistle. This guard put everything at risk to get the video out. Not only did they show Rick's present state, but they also showed how badly he was being held captive. There is no denying that the pictures show Rick, who is thin and has a hollowed-out face and sunken lips. He is not wearing a shirt and has deep bruises across his chest. The walls of his cell were smeared with something dark, probably old food, maybe blood. Besides his torn mattress, the only thing that could be identified in the room was a picture that he wouldn't let go of. He rocked back and forth and spoke incoherently to the walls. On one side of the internet, people think this is proof that the whole thing was planned and that the system is trying to break him. Others say that he has finally felt the pain that the crimes he was accused of caused other people. The fact that Rick never yells is scary. He doesn't cry. He only rocks and talks. In a later clip, days after the original footage, a voice can be heard from behind the bars. "Pong King, where's your mom?" is being yelled at him by someone else in the prison, not Rick. Then there is the clear sound of something heavy and wet being thrown against the bars. Rick is still not scared. His eyes are closed, and he just looks up and says, "History." In less than a week, the video had been seen over 140 million times, and hashtags like #PawnZol and #HowATrickenHell were used all over the world. But among people who make memes and internet jokes, something more serious started to happen. A letter from Amnesty International was pinned up, asking for an instant investigation into how Harrison was being treated. This caught the attention of well-known human rights activists. They also pointed out other troubling patterns in the jail, like the fact that people were often put in solitary confinement as a punishment, that sentences were being repeated at night, and that prisoners were not allowed to get food. Then came the rumors that made everything unravel. There were more videos, and the ones that were shown to the public were only a small part of the evil that happened every day in prison. It was said that guards had been told to carefully manipulate Rick's mind in order to make him lose his sense of who he is. He was supposedly shown very fake video of his son Corey making fun of him. It was said that he was fed food that had drugs in it, and prisoners were paid in cigarettes to make fun of the Pawn star. Even though none of this has been proven, this rumors made the story even more confusing. Videos on TikTok that broke down every move Rick made in the video went popular. Some people said they saw Morse code being tapped on the wall. A video with more than 30 million views said Rick blink a message asking for help. Some people thought that the jail might have staged the video as a way to test people's ability to not care, or as a form of psychological warfare. Meanwhile, the History Channel removed all episodes of Pawn Stars from its streaming site without comment. Several news sources asked Rick Harrison, Corey Harrison's son, and his co-stars to do interviews, but they all turned them down. TMZ reporters pressed Corey at a gas station, but he just said, "No comment," and drove off. But quiet says a lot, and the internet got louder in that empty space. Some people wanted Rick to be freed right away, saying that no one should have to go through such torture, no matter how bad their acts were. Others said this was karmic retribution for all the lives Harrison was said to have wrecked with his greed, manipulation, and never-ending desire for fame. What is the truth then? Is Rick Harrison a genius who was misread and broke the law to keep history alive, or is he a cold-blooded killer who hides behind the charm of Americana? Is this leaked footage a cry for help or a cinematic form of punishment performed with surgical cruelty? One thing is for sure. What you thought Rick Harrison looked like in the past is not at all like the man in that jail cell. He is not the smug pawn king who made a lot of money during the Civil War. Rick Harrison is no longer the face of crime in Las Vegas. He used to be the head of a family pawn shop. He is now locked up by time, guilt, and the machine that made and destroyed him. The whole world is paying close attention. Rick Harrison didn't have it easy when he was born. In fact, in the 1960s, most people in the woods of North Carolina would laugh in shock if you told them that a kid like Rick would one day be the face of a multimillion-dollar TV brand. His story is not at all exciting. It's marked by sickness, trouble learning, and money problems. And that's exactly what makes his fame so intriguing. In America, he stands for the average trickster. A man who had almost nothing to begin with but built a kingdom with smarts and hard work. But when you look back, you can see that there were probably always signs that the kingdom was hiding something darker. Ambition is something that is often praised, but it can be the difference between being smart and being bad. Rick was born in Lexington, North Carolina, on March 22, 1965. As a child, he was told he had epilepsy. He had seizures a lot, which kept him out of school for long amounts of time. Most kids fall behind, but Rick used his time alone to learn on his own, spending many hours by himself. He read a lot of books, mostly history, guns, and collectibles books. He built his brand around his early interest in rare and unusual things. At the time, he was just a kid trying to figure out what was going on in the world. His family first lived in San Diego and then in Las Vegas, Nevada. Las Vegas was a city that depended on risk, lies, and illusions, just what a future pawn king would need. Rick Harrison and his father, Richard Benjamin Harrison, opened a gold and silver pawn shop in the early 1980s with money they had made from working in other pawn shops. Pawn shops are notoriously rough places to work, and the people who work there are often on the verge of losing everything. But Rick saw a chance in the chaos. He didn't just want to make money by selling old things. He knew that pawn shop business could be fun, so he set out to make it happen. He pitched his idea to History Channel for years before they finally agreed to go ahead with it in 2009. Everything changed after that choice. Pawn stars quickly became a big deal in pop culture. Not just the things that were bought and sold, but also the stories that went along with them. A sword from the Civil War, a map from the 18th century, and guitars from stories about the dead. Rick was at the center of everything on the show, which mixed business with memories. The host who always has a smirk on his face and knows a lot about everything, from old slot machines to Abraham Lincoln's personal belongings. The show not only got a lot of watchers, it started a movement. Music, tourists started flooding the gold and silver pawn shop, with up to 100 coming every day and items flying off the shelves. There was more to Rick Harrison now than just running a business. He was well known now. He put together ads, set up talks, and spoke at party events. For more than 10 years, his image was linked to the strong will and business sense of honest Americans. It was clear to fans that things were getting worse behind the scenes, with more and more unspoken truths, whispers, and sealed papers. Sources say that things were getting worse inside the pawn shop, even though Rick seemed calm on the outside. The rate of employee loss went up. Long-term employees started going missing without a reason, and even the film crew said that people were acting strangely, filming was held up, and there were strange financial discrepancies. There were also growing legal concerns about the authenticity of the things being bought and sold on air. In 2017, a lot of quiet cases started to pile up. Rick was accused by former workers of fixing wages and ratings and putting pressure on them to keep quiet about shady business dealings. There was no public acknowledgement of most of these cases because they were settled out of court with NDAs and complainants going away. Then the front of the building got its first big crack. A Nevada independent news story said that Rick had sent more than $2.3 million through offshore accounts using fake companies that were linked to the sale of fake items. The piece wasn't given much attention by mainstream media, which saw it as either a plot or angry writing from ex-partners. But the federal police did not throw it out. In 2019, the IRS's carelessness led to a quiet audit. After the audit, an arrest warrant was issued, and a storage room rented by a business related to Rick's pawn shop was searched. Everything changed when they found what was inside. Music, in charge. Found dozens of boxes marked historical storage that were full of fake Picasso prints, fake war medals, and human remains wrapped in plastic with tags that could only partially identify them that were connected to unsolved crimes in Las Vegas and Arizona. A scary find was a binder called Recovered Assets that had pictures of what looked like excavation sites, possibly graves, and records of things that had been dug up. Investigators also found a handwritten book that they think was written by Rick. It had disturbing thoughts about keeping stories alive that people wanted to forget. The whole country was shocked. Someone who used to charm famous people and captivate millions of people every week on TV was now being charged with many crimes, including tax evasion, money laundering, tampering with evidence, and selling stolen historical items. There are more troubling questions. Are these things linked to Rick? Who are these hurt people? Is there something bad going on? Rick's arrest in early 2020 was a big deal. Rick is said not to have fought back when federal agents surrounded him outside the pawn shop. People who saw him say he just raised his hands and said, "I've been sold." He was handcuffed in front of a group of tourists, some of whom still had signed copies of his best-selling autobiography, License to Pawn. The public's response was quick and harsh. At first, some loyal fans didn't believe the accusations. But as more proof came in from a video of the storage unit showing dangerous material handling teams taking out crates, things started to change. His last guardian started to quiet down. History Channel quickly canceled the show and said they were no longer working with Rick in gold and silver. The pawn shop sponsors quit. Business relationships broke up. After that came the test. A long-running courtroom thriller that didn't hide anything and showed more than most people thought they would. Prosecutors showed shocking financial records. Millions of dollars were cleaned by charities and shell LLCs, some of which were set up in the Cayman Islands and others with the names of people who have since died. Former appraisers, forensic historians, and even grieving families said that Rick had bought stolen heirlooms that were connected to their lost loved ones. The charges were no longer just about money, they were personal and really horrible. An immunized witness said that Rick not only sold fake artifacts on purpose, but he also knew that some of them were connected to current investigations. This was the most damning evidence. Rick, he said, would often joke, "The dead don't tell tales, but their stuff sells like hotcakes." It only took the jury less than 5 hours to find the person guilty of all charges in a case that shocked the news media. The judge made it clear that Rick did more than just rip off banks or break the public's trust. He dealt in death. He had taken history to make money. Now, society would remember him not as a businessman but as someone who taught us a lesson. Rick Harrison was sentenced to life in prison without the chance of parole. The TV host, who used to be happy, was now a prisoner chained at the ankle. A lot of people thought that was the end of the story. It didn't, though. The kingdom may no longer be around. The store might be closed. Even though the man was hidden behind concrete walls and barbed wire fences, the truth still got out. What happens next, what rises from behind those prison walls, will turn this cautionary tale into something much colder, something even the harshest critics couldn't have imagined. A man can lose everything and still be able to think straight. But Rick Harrison had lost that too, as everyone was about to find out. It began with whispers and finished with news stories. The country felt like it was being sucked into a vortex of doubt as the truth about Rick Harrison's alleged crimes came to light. What began as a simple case of tax evasion quickly turned into something much scarier, more complicated, more troubling, and ultimately more puzzling. The charges against Rick weren't what shocked people, it was the fact that he may have lived two lives, one based on greed, lying, and a strange fixation on the past. Rick was a man who was invited into millions of living rooms every week. Music, the first public charge was tax fraud, which doesn't happen to famous people very often and wasn't enough to bring down a media company. Federal officials say Rick said he made more than $7 million over the course of 8 years. It is said that he laundered this money through a number of fake companies. This money came from selling things abroad, dealing rare artifacts on the black market, and doing other business that was never officially recorded through his store. But the police didn't give up. That's it. In fact, they had just started. A federal indictment that had been kept secret was leaked to the press a few weeks later. This was the real bombshell. On the list of new charges were tax evasion, foreign money laundering, conspiracy to defraud, forgery of historical papers, and trafficking stolen goods. The illegal possession of human remains was one charge that got a lot of attention across the country and on the internet. That last claim set off the music firestorm. Everything in the storage unit was moved to a small temperature-controlled building that was listed under the name of an LLC called Recollector Holdings. On paper, it looked like a normal business that stored collectibles, but Rick's deepest secrets were kept there. FBI officers found the unit full of wooden crates on the walls during a raid. Each box was carefully labeled and sealed with plastic vacuum seals. There were all kinds of labels on the items, from normal Civil War buttons and lapel pins to signed vinyl records and strange bone pieces. Inside crates, people found a scalp with braided hair and an unnamed baby skull from 1871. Not only historical items, but also what were eventually identified by forensic scientists as real human remains. Some were kept, while others were breaking down. There were also papers that linked many of these bodies to closed cases of people going missing in Nevada, Arizona, and New Mexico. In one box, there were 2 skulls with tags written by hand on their jawbones. In 2006, one marked John Doe was found outside of Elko. Not claimed. The other simply said, "History deserves a place." This strange and ambiguous phrase would haunt detectives throughout the case. During interviews with police, it became clear that Rick's activities weren't just about making money, but also about something much deeper in his mind. A more in-depth investigation revealed a journal that Rick had kept for years called Artifacts of the Forgotten. It was written in small, dense handwriting and contained his thoughts on preserving forgotten stories, his dislike of popular history, and his belief that he was the guardian of truths that everyone else wanted to hide. In one entry, he wrote, "History doesn't just live in books. It lives in the dust, in bones, in things no one wants to remember. I collect so the world doesn't forget." Once this journal was proven to be real, it became the main evidence for the prosecution's case that Rick Harrison wasn't just a greedy person taking advantage of a broken system, but someone who had gone too far in terms of morals and ethics to return. He made a lot of money and built a hidden collection buried in bodies and music, blood with his platform, fame, and access. It turned out that Rick had sold fake star memorabilia about at least 3 different deaths, which turned the case into a maze. One of these items was a lock of hair that was said to belong to Marilyn Monroe. However, DNA testing later showed that it was not only fake, but also came from the body of an unidentified woman that was stored in the same building. With forensic anthropologists and expert examiners being brought in by the prosecutors, the hearing turned into a circus. Findings and testimony in court that shocked everyone. FBI agents who are now retired said they found a network of financial transactions that stretched across 3 countries and had accounts in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands. It was said that the money from fake organizations would be used to protect historical artifacts, but the real money went into private safes and secret bank vaults. One safe was discovered behind a false wall in the pawn shop containing over $2 million in untraceable cash and a bundle of human teeth wrapped in an American flag. The stories from former workers were also very upsetting. One person said Rick kept things that couldn't be sold in a secret basement below the pawn shop. Another said they heard strange sounds like moaning, clinking, or distant voices coming from the basement late at night. When asked why they hadn't come forward earlier, many witnesses said it was because they were afraid, there were threats, and they had signed non-disclosure agreements that were enforced by fears of harm. One former appraiser who worked on Pawn Stars said that Rick often asked them to lie about how much fake things were worth so he could sell them to preferred buyers off-camera. It wasn't just about making the show more valuable, people were also using it to launder money by passing off fake artifacts as real ones and sometimes trading real items for fakes before the inspection was over. But it was the bodies that got the most attention from the people. Medical experts said that at least 4 sets of bones found in Rick's things showed signs of surgery that had been done after he died, like someone had tried to put together different bones to make hybrid skeletons. One head was stuck on the wooden plaque looks like a hunting prize. The skull had been carefully sawed, then lacquered and engraved with the words, "Truth has a face." Despite the horrifying evidence, Rick's silence during the trial made it even scarier. He didn't say much, and his lawyers said he was mentally ill, but the prosecution said he was being deliberately silenced as a way to gain an advantage. Rick refused to speak before he was sentenced. He just stared at the floor with a face as cold as money, not moving. The only thing that broke the silence was when the prosecutors showed a clip from Pawn Stars in the closing arguments. In that episode, Rick talked about how important it is to be real. Witnesses say he had a strange look on his face for a short time, but it was just a faint smile that went away almost right away. Music, the jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before coming to a unanimous decision. Rick Harrison was found guilty of all major charges, including tax evasion, trafficking stolen goods, falsifying historical documents, abusing human remains, obstructing justice, and conspiracy to defraud. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without parole, calling his actions a cold blend of opportunism, deceit, and human exploitation disguised as preservation of history. The nation went silent. Media outlets struggled to describe the scope of the case. Analysts compared this trial to those of notorious figures like Bernie Madoff or Jeffrey Dahmer, not because of similar crimes, but because of the psychological impact it left. There wasn't just a fall from grace, there was a plunge into darkness, with each new piece of information more disturbing than the last. The phrase, "worse than death," started to trend, not because of the crimes, but because of the leaked information about the upcoming prison footage. Before that footage came out, Rick Harrison was sentenced to something that might be scarier than death. People were cut off from each other, culture was erased, and the man who had turned history into a market had become a ghost of his own making. People would never look at pawn shops or reality TV the same way again. Music. Rick Harrison's trial didn't just draw people in, it ate them up. By the time the opening statement was over, the courtroom was full of doubt. Legal experts called it the trial of the decade, not just because the defendant was famous, but also because the case was so complicated, scary, and had multiple psychological plots that ran parallel to each other. The prosecution called it a systematic desecration of history, money, and people. The defense, on the other hand, said Rick was just a collector who was obsessed with the past and driven by compulsion, not corruption. No one could have predicted what would happen over the next 7 weeks. The trial took place in a high-security federal courthouse in downtown Las Vegas and was attended by a rotating cast of media figures, legal experts, and even celebrities. Many of them had been on Pawn Stars and were now trying to figure out their relationship to a man who was seen as a modern-day monster. The courtroom had to be specially designed with extra seating and security in mind. People started waiting outside before dawn in hopes of getting one of the few seats available in the courtroom. The scene outside the court and Rick's change. People camped outside the courthouse and shared daily updates on social media. Each morning, Rick arrived under armed guard, chained and quiet. He had lost weight, and his face, which used to be full, was now thin and expressionless. His hair was starting to thin and gray more than ever, and he rarely looked at the crowd. The man who used to smile on national TV now stared straight ahead as if he was already serving his sentence in his mind. This was the opening statement from the prosecution. A big digital screen showed a picture from the storage unit of 2 human skulls next to each other, with handwritten tags on the jawbones of each. There were whispers in the courtroom as the lead prosecutor stood up and said, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is not a case about television." There was a lot of evidence presented by the prosecution that showed how Rick Harrison got involved in illegal activities. Email chains, shipping logs, and handwritten ledgers were used to show how artifacts were bought, misvalued, and sold. Videos showed Rick negotiating with pawn shop stars for specific items, and the prosecution said many of them had been swapped or improperly authenticated. The testimony, on the other hand, gave the case emotional weight. First, forensic accountants, historians, archivists, and artifact experts talked about how Rick had broken the law, laundered money, and faked providence papers to make his things worth more than they were worth. One expert said that about 40% of the items shown on Pawn Stars were not from where they seemed to come from or were not real. For example, a Civil War rifle was found to have come from a prop shop in Las Vegas. Then there were stories from former employees, pawn shop staff, and show crew members. Some talked about a secret culture within the business, a backstage hierarchy where Rick made decisions and surrounded himself with helpers. One cameraman said that Rick would sometimes whisper to him, "Make it sparkle no matter what," when he wasn't sure if an item was real or not. Another worker who was in charge of shipping said that items sent to buyers in other countries were often changed after they were appraised and replaced with cheaper copies, while the originals were kept to be sold to individuals again. The most emotional testimonies came from the families of unidentified bodies. One woman broke down in tears as she talked about how her brother went missing in 2012 and later found his work in a storage unit. Another man talked about how his mother's bracelet was stolen in a theft and then put up for auction on an online site that no longer exists. These witnesses not only put together the pieces, but also gave specifics about the effects. It was no longer about numbers or paperwork, but about people's lives, trauma, and betrayal of trust. The defense fought back, but the attacks didn't stop. They said Rick had undiagnosed obsessive-compulsive disorder and had become addicted to collecting, that his desire to keep history alive had turned into a mental dependence. His lawyers said he never meant to hurt anyone and that his actions, while questionable, were caused by emotional problems rather than malicious greed. They even showed parts of Rick's personal journal that were full of random thoughts about history, heritage, and loneliness. One entry that was read out loud said, "People don't want the truth. They want to remember the past in a way that makes them feel at ease. I just give it to them. Squeezed, framed, and cleaned." For their part, the defense tried to show Rick as someone who lost control of the story he made up and became overwhelmed by it. They emphasized that he had no criminal record, his health problems, and his contributions to historical education. A psychiatrist told the judge that Rick was severely disconnected from reality and should not be jailed but instead should be placed in a hospital. But the government fought back hard. They showed surveillance video showing Rick personally overseeing the packing of altered products. The objects that were shown in the emails where Rick tells appraisers to make up a story to make the item more valuable. And the pieces of evidence that showed Rick had talked to a man on the dark web about off-market ways to store fragile goods might have been the worst. A vague reference that the prosecutor said had something to do with human remains. People in the courtroom were shocked, both because Rick had done something wrong and because he seemed so cold and serious. By the fifth week, the trial had turned into a show that everyone couldn't stop watching. It became popular to say, "Pawn Star Predator." Every day, news sites reported on and analyzed every witness, and overnight, podcasts were created that were only about the trial. Things like merchandise began to be made. T-shirts, pins, and fake real bones that say, "Preserve this." But Rick didn't say a word during all of this. He didn't give evidence. He didn't say sorry. He didn't look at the lawyer at all. His lawyers said it was because his mental health was getting worse, but other people weren't sure if it was just a lack of shame or something more sinister, like an ego that wouldn't admit anything, even if it meant the world was ending. The final moments of the hearing were burning through the air. At the end of the case, the prosecutors showed a simple slideshow with pictures of each victim that were linked to the bodies that were found on Rick. As each picture was shown, the lawyer read the person's name, the date they went missing, and the last place anyone knew they were. The room went quiet. There were no tricks or showmanship, just the truth, the faces, and a haunting reflection that history is made by people who deserve to be remembered honestly, not by people who are collecting it. The jury went away to think about the case. 6 hours later, they came back and found everyone guilty of all charges. The judge told Rick what the punishment would be, and his voice was calm but firm. "Mr. Harrison, you didn't just use history to your advantage, you broke it. You turned truth into a product, profiting off pain, and in doing so, you crossed the line between curiosity and cruelty." Rick was given a sentence of life in jail without the chance of getting out. Other than a small shift in his chair, he didn't say anything. In a big way, his son Corey, as well as other family members and former co-workers, were not in court. The public hearing of Rick Harrison was over. However, no one thought the story would only start there. The whole country was shocked by what happened in that courtroom. The courtroom inside the jail walls would make it even scarier. Gavel had just finished his move when Rick Harrison was led out of the courtroom and into a secure prison transport car that was waiting outside the courthouse. With his wrists and legs shackled, he was put into a plain white box truck with steel windows that couldn't be used to identify it. This time, there were no reporters or cameras flashing on the red carpet. There was only the sound of steel hitting metal and the distant hum of the truck engine as it drove off, taking the remains of a man who loved by millions. Rick was taken to a maximum security federal jail in the Southwest that is located in an area that has not been disclosed. This prison is known for its harsh conditions and brutal treatment of high-risk prisoners. The prison's name is still hidden in official records, but we do know that it's a place where people who are thought to be high-risk escapees and a threat to the organization's order are kept. There were leaked reports from investigative reporters that set the tone from the time Rick walked into the building. The whole body search, chemical cleaning, and psychological test that Rick had to go through took less than 15 minutes. The few personal things he was allowed to bring with him were taken away from him. He was given a thin blanket, an old pair of boots, and a gray outfit. His cell was 6 feet by 9 feet and had rusted metal bars and a cracked concrete floor. There were no books, pins, or ways to get in touch with other people. He ate cooked cabbage, gray mashed beans, and a cup of warm water for his first meal. Music. People who saw Rick eat say he didn't eat much, not because he wasn't getting enough to eat in jail, but because he just couldn't. His face was pale, and his mouth was slack. He was still shocked and couldn't believe what was happening. Rick Harrison had been in charge of his empire for years, but now the government had full power over it. There were other things against him as well. It was also the people inside. Inside the jail, word quickly spread. This is the Pin Star guy. Music. A former prisoner who is now under witness protection says that on Rick's first night, the other prisoners made fun of him by banging on the walls and yelling insults like, "Tell us how much my kidney is worth now, Pawn King." One person yelled into the darkness, while another said they heard someone whisper, "You sold the dead. Now you're one of us." And Rick didn't reply. In the corner of his cell, with his knees pulled up to his chest, he was mumbling words that didn't make sense and thinking about dust, catalog numbers, and crates that didn't have labels on them. Rick was put under suicide watch twice in his first week. Guards noticed that he was acting strangely. He tried to flush his blanket down the toilet one time and yelled that it was full of lies. He tried to make a hole in the wall again with a piece of a broken food tray. A forensic scientist later confirmed that the scratches looked like an old form of Morse code. Even though the whole message couldn't be confirmed, he wasn't put in with the rest of the people right away. The government was worried about his safety, which was natural since dangerous inmates are often targeted. But the pestering went on even when they were alone. The guards were said to have played recordings of old Pawn Stars episodes over the intercom system and watched them again late at night. One story said that the sound was changed to include whispers and muffled screams below Rick's voice. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell to stay up to date on the shocking new information about Rick Harrison's life in prison and the strange things that have been happening around him. Both physical and mental loss. Rick quickly lost weight. The man who used to eat fancy meals in Vegas was getting smaller, his face was getting thinner, and his hands were shaking from not eating enough or from withdrawal. After being leaked, his medical records showed that he had lost almost 30 pounds in just the first month. His hair broke easily, his gums bled, and sores showed up on his arms. This could have been because of stress or the dirty conditions. But what worried me even more were the signs of mental breakdown. By the third week, Rick was said to be talking to someone who wasn't there. He called this person Chester, which could have been a reference to a real person or a distorted thought process caused by his mental illness. He would sometimes get very angry with Chester. He would sometimes say to Chester, "They don't know, Chester. They have no idea what we've saved." Psychiatrists in jail wrote in their logs that Rick showed signs of acute dissociative disorder and trauma-related delusions. He was supposed to get help, but instead he was locked up alone for 14 days. Food was pushed through a small hole in the door for 14 days without any sunlight. For 14 days, the only sounds were the water dripping and horses laughing far away through the concrete walls. Rick had cuts on his arms and what looked like blood under his nails when he showed up. He wouldn't talk, wouldn't blink for long periods of time, and wouldn't answer when his name was called. Then, one day, he blew up. A guard who was supposed to clean the lower levels said that Rick started yelling things that made no sense for almost 30 minutes. He was talking about deals with price tags on bones that were already dead and a kingdom that never sleeps. His angry words were caught on a guard's body camera and later used in an internal review into how prisoners were treated. Rick can be seen ripping his clothes and scratching at the walls on the video. He then falls to the ground in a corner of his cell and starts crying hysterically. He was put to sleep after this outburst. He woke up to find a picture stuck to the inside of his cell door. It was a Pawn Stars scene from the first season. Rick is happy next to his dad, his son Corey, and Chumley, who has been with them for a long time. With a red marker, someone wrote, "I sold my soul for this." No one took blame. No one got in trouble. As Rick's mental health got worse, the system around him got worse too. He got less strict medical care, his mental health support was put off, and guards liked to make him angry. Some people were accused of spraying bleach near his bed while he was asleep. Some people wrote strange things on his food tray, like, "Judged by God," and "Priceless Pain." It was clear that Rick Harrison was not a normal prisoner. It was a sign of betrayal that America's greed had been hacked. And in this jail, signs were made to be broken. Fall and the Scary Movie. It wasn't therapy or even real punishment. It was something else. It got worse, it broke down. A man who used to sell lost memories now only had memories to hold on to. The moment the video was uploaded to the internet, everything changed. There was no TV show with the movie. There were no official announcements, press statements, or early leaks from news outlets or blogs that try to get people to click on them. The video showed up as a ghost in a machine on a forum called the Forgotten Pawn on the dark web. It was posted anonymously. The movie only had a timestamp and no other information. The title was very scary and damaged the storage. There were 6 clips on TikTok and Telegram that spread it hundreds of times in less than an hour. The video had gone viral in every way by the end of the day. By that night, it was impossible to avoid social media feeds, which were full of responses from all over the internet. Hashtags went crazy. H-Pawn is still alive. The video of Rick Harrison was hacked worse than death. What people saw wasn't the shock of it, but a picture of Rick Harrison's total mental breakdown taken by a cheap surveillance camera in his cell. The video lasted for 7 minutes and began with hazy footage of the cell. It was taken at 3:47 a.m., as shown in the top corner. There was no sound, all that could be heard was silence and flickers from the light sensor on the camera. Rick Harrison was hunched over against the wall in the far corner of the cell. He was almost naked, and his hair and beard were long and matted. His body looked thin, with ribs sticking out and pale skin. He was holding a torn small photograph in one hand, which was said to be an old picture of the gold and silver pawn shop. His fingers were moving in a strange, repeated way. The water had ruined and crumpled the edges of the picture, making it look like it had been held too many times. He slowly swayed in time with the music for almost 2 minutes. Then he looked up out of the blue and started messing up something. There was no sound in the video, but amateur lip readers online immediately started analyzing it. His words were backed up by forensic film analysts who saw what they said. They were never the ones hurt. Their history. "I saved what the world discarded." He said the phrase over and over, sometimes whispering and sometimes looking blankly. As if he were trying to remember a truth, each time he said it, it seemed more desperate than the last. Whether it was done on purpose or by accident, the camera moved a little to show the walls behind him in his cell. They were dirty not only from dirt, but also from something darker. Many people who saw it at first thought it was mold or food waste, but later, former prisoners who knew the facility said it was dry blood from Rick and the people who came before him. At the 426 mark, something scary happened. Rick jerked and dropped the picture. He then began to pace around his small cell. He mopped his lips against the wall and punched the corner 1 time. Then he turned around to face the camera. He stared straight into the camera lens with his eyes wide open and bloodshot. He didn't say a word. It was just a blank, lifeless stare. He then smiled. Not a smile of enjoyment or arrogance, but a slow, distorted grin that startled watchers. Someone looked at them like, "Now do you get it?" That was the moment that broke the internet. Someone else's voice, which was hard to make out, could be heard from outside the picture. The voice yelled, "Where's your mom now, Pawn King?" Rick jerked back. He hid in the corner of his cell and curled up into a ball, like a dog that had been beaten. Something then hit the bars of his cell a second later. It was sticky and brown. Some said it was food. Others thought it might have been feces. There was no doubt about the damage that was left. Rick did nothing. The only thing he did was close his eyes and hum slowly. A scary childish tune that some viewers later figured out was a slow version of the Star-Spangled Banner. At 6:02, he spoke again, but this time to the picture instead of the walls. I told them they were coming. We haven't forgotten about you. I gave each of you a name. You're safe now. In the cup. In the cup. He was holding the picture with trembling hands like it was a holy relic, and his breathing was getting fast. Then he started saying something over and over in a strange voice. Chester, let's get into the vault. Chester, let's get into the vault. Before this, the word Chester had never been connected to Rick in the public eye. But as viewers would later learn, during the raid on the storage facility, investigators found a small statue called Chester in Rick's private office. A clay figure used in the rare episodes of Pawn Stars, once jokingly referred to as his business conscience. It looked like Chester had changed into something else. It could be a broken alter ego or Rick's own voice of guilt. The video finished quickly. In the corner, Rick curled up with the picture close to his chest and swayed to the beat of the music. The scary video and the word got around. More loud than any screen in the last 24 hours. All of the big news outlets showed the video. CNN said it was the most disturbing prison video ever shared, and Rolling Stone said it showed the fall of America's favorite con artist in real time. Users of TikTok began to post responses. Some were crying, and others were making dark jokes. Before, Twitter was full of second-by-second reviews of the video. People looked at the tape and asked what Rick was really trying to say. Was this craziness, regret, or trickery? Someone brought up a scary fact. He looked like there was a name rolled up on the back of the picture he was holding. With better filters, detectives thought it said, Michael C. This wasn't proven, but some thought it might be a reference to Michael Connor, a man from Nevada who went missing in 2011 and whose dental records matched a skull fragment found in Rick's storage unit. Theories grew and spread. Some believed Rick was trying to connect with the outside world, while others thought the entire scene was staged by the prison to break his spirit or by Rick himself in a desperate attempt to garner public sympathy. What the following prison worker said was even more disturbing. They were later fired and detained. The guard said that the video was just one of many that had been taken, and that other guards had access to many more. Not only that, but he also said Rick had tried to pull out his own toenails at one point. During another time, he wrote names and blood on the floor of his cell. At least, according to this source, the names of the victims were played over and over during guard shifts with a morbid interest. The video had been used internally as a form of humiliation. He was now a unpleasant show. People who told the truth said he was no longer a prisoner. He was just a show for the people. Split up. Others were horrified and really felt sorry for the watchers. This is not fair to anyone. People often wrote on TikTok, I don't care what he did. This is torturing people's minds. Some people were cruel. He locked people in boxes and now he lives with them. One user wrote, Karma doesn't miss. A group of human rights organizations called for a full federal probe in a statement. They say that the video could be against the rights in Amendment ETH against cruel and unusual punishment. The ACLU said the film was very scary. The UN Human Rights Council asked the U.S. prison system to be more open, but the Department of Corrections didn't say anything public, and there was no confirmation of who leaked the video. The lack of communication only made things worse. The last blow then came. People put the strange video quote on t-shirts, protest signs, and hashtags. They are not helpless. They're history. I kept alive what everyone else wanted to forget. The boundary became popular, and online conspiracy theorists, anti-government activists, and nihilists repeated it over and over again in a twisted way. A few people saw it as an admission. Some people thought it was the first step toward a bigger reveal of what Rick really believed. He wasn't a bad guy. He was the one who kept dark facts safe. As of now, no new video has been made public, but there are still rumors that there is a lot more. If the next video got out, it would have something worse on it, something that people couldn't watch, something that might make them ask in the end. Ask someone a question they don't want to hear. Could it be that Rick Harrison is more than just a man who fell? Did he mean to warn us the whole time? When the video of Rick Harrison in jail first went around, it split the internet into two groups. There were people who thought he was completely broken by guilt and people who thought it was all a show to get public sympathy and get out of his term. But as more information came out, it became clear that Rick's condition wasn't caused by a single emotional moment. Instead, it was caused by extreme psychological pressure slowly wearing away at his mind. Questions that caused debate about Rick's pain. The critical question from the public wasn't whether Rick Harrison was in pain, but what kind of pain he was in. Is he really losing touch with reality and going crazy? Or was this behavior a way to protect themselves, a desperate way for them to think in order to stay alive? What turned into a nightmare when you were awake? Before you can answer that, you need to know about the world Rick came from before he went to jail, especially the kind of prison that only houses important or dangerous people. Music. Prison isn't just a place where people are locked up, it's also a place that's meant to take away their identity, purpose, and personality. And for Rick, his whole life had been based on how he thought other people saw him, respected him, and listened to him. No one was paying attention now. There were no talks to have, no cameras to attract, and no deals to close. There was only quiet and memory. When experts looked at the leaked video, they saw signs of serious dissociation. A clinical psychologist named Dr. Mara Jensen who works with prisoners who have been through stress saw clear signs of dissociative disorder in Rick's behavior. In the words of Dr. Mara Jensen, Rick's actions can be called textbook fragmentation. When someone is constantly stressed, embarrassed, and alone, their mind starts to protect itself by making layers of truth within reality. Rocking, talking to inanimate objects, and repeating phrases are all signs that someone is trying to get away to a place in their mind where they can feel in charge. This kind of control seems to show up in Rick's life through repetition and practice. Rocking, muttering, clinging to a picture. All of this points to a man trying to hold on to something that makes him think of the person he used to be or the person he thinks he still is. They are not victims, they are history, is something that Rick says a lot in the video that is very upsetting. This may seem like an admission of guilt or an excuse at first look. But some criminologists have given a more complex explanation. People shouldn't use this term. That's not a reason for it. Rick is talking to himself in his head. You could have heard him telling himself this for years while he did things he knew were wrong. A therapist who specializes in trauma, Dr. Eric Thomas, says that when someone is upset and repeats something, it's often a mantra, a way for them to separate themselves emotionally from the effects of their actions. It can be both a way to stay alive and a sign of mental decline that can't be fixed. Then there's Chester, the made-up figure Rick talks to more than once, sometimes in a calm voice and sometimes in a furious one. Something that seemed to be born from fantasies and guilt. As for who or what Chester stands for, some people think it's a separate personality, a broken part of Rick's mind that lets him separate his acts from who he is. Others speculate that Chester is a real person, perhaps someone Rick once worked with, whose influence remains deeply embedded in Rick's psyche. Something that seemed to be born from fantasies and guilt. As for who or what Chester stands for, some people think it's a separate personality, a broken part of Rick's mind that lets him separate his acts from who he is. Others speculate that Chester is a real person, perhaps someone Rick once worked with, whose influence remains deeply embedded in Rick's psyche. Some people think that Chester is Rick's moral guide, which he has been denying for years but is now coming back to life as a voice in his head judging, warning, and punishing him. No matter who it is, Chester really does reflect his presence. He does this to fill the void of being alone in solitary confinement, where sensory deprivation is used as a form of punishment. And the mind makes up sounds, voices, and even full-on hallucinations to make up for it. Rick may have made Chester as his last mental defense because he was devoid of human contact and going through embarrassing pain. Not everyone, though, thinks Rick's fall was an accident. More and more internet theorists and behavioral experts are saying that Rick's mental breakdown was planned. They talk about his past as a performer, the cold persona he kept on Pawn Stars, his ability to control a story, and the years he spent manipulating negotiations for fun and money. Could this be his most complicated show? A plan to get people to feel sorry for them and get the law to look again at the case under the cover of mental instability? An anonymous former TV producer who worked with Rick in the early seasons of Pawn Stars said Rick always knew how to play the crowd. He was able to act weak if he had to. He could cry on cue. I'm not saying he's lying now, but he's the only one who could. A lot of mental health professionals don't agree with this idea. They say that the performance in the video doesn't make sense and that there are no times of self-awareness or other signs that Rick knew the cameras were following him. Instead, his behavior was shaky, broken up, and much more personal, which pointed to a man stuck in a trauma loop instead of writing his own recovery story. There were reports from inside the prison from guards and past staff that painted a very bad picture. Someone who spoke out said that Rick was put on a seditious diet that was strong enough to slow down his motor functions. Another person said that he often refused to eat and instead wrote words that no one could understand over and over on napkins or the floor. He felt like he had something left in him. It was said that one of the guards talked about the basement as if it were a holy place. The store might have been it. Or perhaps his mind had caused the word vault to appear repeatedly in Rick's speech in the leaked tape. Chester let the vault open. Vault. Vault that was locked up. Even though they couldn't see these references, his actions and the way he was acting point to an illusion that might have its roots in control and secrecy. Rick seemed to think that he still knew something important, some truth that other people couldn't get to. Psychologists think that this vault could represent Rick's shame or his need to put the horrible things he had seen and done into groups. Others see it as a metaphor for how he still thinks about his kingdom even though it is gone. This makes the idea that he really lost his mind stronger. It was said that by the second month of his confinement, he was no longer answering to his own name. The medical staff noted signs of mental symptoms, such as tremors that didn't seem to be connected to anything, dreams, and fits that lasted hours without speech. Even so, the system kept him locked up with only cameras and concrete walls. He didn't get therapy or were moved to a psychiatric hospital. The mean jokes that a guard would sometimes tell. Public response continues to oscillate like a pendulum. On one side, there are people who see justice being done to a guy who has harmed people and gotten something good out of his past. On the other side are people who think it's immoral to watch a man's mind fall apart in real time, no matter what crimes he committed. A well-known social media post said it all about the dispute. Rick Harrison needs to be punished, but what we're seeing is not fair. There is abuse going on. What kind of society are we if we treat everyone this way, even those who are guilty? In reaction, some people posted pictures of the bodies they found in his storage unit with the words, "They didn't survive." In the end, the video showed more than just Rick Harrison's mental breakdown. It also showed a system ready to torture a man to the point of going crazy, a public hungry for entertainment, and a culture still trying to figure out the difference between punishment and torture. Has Rick Harrison really gone crazy? Or did he decide to give up? What is certain is that the man who once bargained with Civil War rifles and Elvis souvenirs now lives in a timeless, contextless, and hopeless world. A world where the only thing that exists is a jumbled, broken memory that keeps playing over and over again. Rick Harrison's name was whispered through the high-security prison halls long before he was locked up there. The jail itself had a reputation that was kept secret for a long time. Of course, this facility wasn't named in the government disclosures, it was only given a number code. But to past prisoners, prison staff, and legal experts, it was known by a different name, Black Veil. The jail was built many years ago in a remote desert area. Its original purpose was to house some of the most dangerous federal criminals in the country, including those who were mentally unstable or who were likely to commit violent federal crimes. It was built to be harsh and dry on purpose, with high walls, silent rooms that were separated from each other, infrared cameras, and automatic cell doors that were set to stay locked during important times. Unlike places that are meant to help people get better, this was made to erase. When video of Rick Harrison's mental decline was made public, the focus finally turned to the jail, the dark place where the video could have been made. After the leak, investigative reporters and people who fight for jail rights looked into Black Veil's operations on their own. They found a pattern of abuse, psychological warfare, and institutional neglect that had been going on for a long time but was hidden by layers of red tape. An anonymous former worker who worked there called it a human control experiment. One former assistant guard said that the jail had an unofficial set of rules for high-level inmates that they called the core protocol. Complete deprivation of all senses, timed humiliation exercises, and a series of evaluation sessions that were not recorded and took place in rooms without official supervision were all part of this procedure. It is said that the prisoners who were part of this program were given skewed records of their own trials that were sent to them at night through the prison's internal communication system. These tapes were played over and changed to include laughter, screams, or the names of people who were killed. Food that is highly salted or not salted at all, flashing lights, and more. By changing the clocks and lights, days can be made longer or shorter. One former guard, who is now hiding in another country, talked about how an inmate who had been locked up alone for 3 years lost his mind. He told himself at night that the sun had gone out and everything in the world was gone. He had forgotten his own name by the time we dropped him off at General Pop. He believed he was stuck in the past. This wasn't just torturing their minds. There had been a lot of reports of physical abuse at the center. A 2018 report presented to the Office of the Inspector General detailed numerous unexplained injuries in prisoners, broken ribs, missing teeth, dislocated joints. Either the medical records for these accidents were lost or signed by someone who wasn't supposed to be there. The investigation was ended in secret, but now sources say that the results were hidden to avoid a public scandal. Even scarier is the fact that these problems were not caused by Rick Harrison's body. They were just giving the jail a new person to target in Rick. The staff apparently saw a one-of-a-kind chance. A man who used to be popular and dethroned a person that millions of people followed is now just another prisoner. People were so interested in his fall that the guards, wardens, and managers could hide their worst crimes behind the guise of justice. Internal documents leaked by a former nurse at the facility showed that Rick was flagged during intake because of all the attention he was getting from the media and how good of a public image he had. A message was written by hand next to his name. Do not call without permission. Insiders say that permission came from a small group of chosen administrators who are not publicly named, the Keepers. These people controlled all of Rick's interactions with others, watched how he behaved, and decided what, if any, rights he would have while making notes on him. Journalists got hold of notes that said things like, meal refused, called slop, could be hallucinating again, murmuring to Chester while sleeping, needed photo, family photo denied, cried for 2 hours, and started repeating sounds tonight. There was no recovery here. The goal was to condition. Sources said that the guards were split, some were upset by what they saw and quietly quit or asked to be transferred, while others enjoyed seeing Rick's mental health get worse and were said to be betting on how long he would last before going completely crazy. Someone who used to work there said that Rick was seen standing in the dark and looking at the wall one night in the first few weeks of his confinement. He turned to face me and asked, "Do you hear the judgment? It never stops." After that, he laughed a dry, awful laugh. In another incident mentioned in the internal report, Rick was left in a cold isolation room for 14 hours with only a wet blanket to wear. When asked, a guard said it was an administrative mistake, but video from the hallway showed him laughing as he turned off the heater by hand. Then there was the problem with the picture. Several guards told the judge in secret that Rick could not have had the picture of the gold and silver pawn shop that went viral in his cell. Personal items had to be asked for and accepted through a strict set of steps. No one knows how he got it. Some believe it was planted by staff as a trigger for an experiment to see how he would respond if the manipulation was not passive but active. This is a wicked plan. A lot of people who used to be criminals are now speaking out. Some prisoners who have been freed have talked about similar situations. There was no sunshine, fake medical records, food that was laced with sleep or energy-boosting drugs, and lights that flickered and changed colors all the time. One guy, who is now in jail, said that he had been watching Rick from a cell down the hall. They meant to hurt him. It was clear whenever he began to feel better. They would make more noise. Lights for games. I heard clips from his show one night, but the voices were rough and high, like music demons. He screamed so hard that he passed out. Even though there is a lot of proof, officials are still denying any wrongdoing. A short statement from the Federal Bureau of Prisons said, "All prisoners are treated in line with federal laws and guidelines. We take allegations of misconduct seriously and are reviewing the matter." However, the review, if it exists, has led to no results, no updates, no accountability. Meanwhile, Rick continues to deteriorate. Recent reports indicate that he has lost the ability to speak in full sentences, communicating only in whispers, fragmented words that he no longer recognizes as his own name. He spends hours curled up in a ball, counting and talking to Chester more than anyone else. And the prison keeps running as usual. The public's unchecked and unapproachable pressure keeps building. Protests have broken out outside of federal facilities, and human rights groups are calling for hearings in Congress. Civil lawsuits are being prepared, but the bureaucracy operates slowly and the damage has already been done. Rick Harrison may be the most famous victim of Black Veil's hidden brutality, but perhaps he is not the only victim. He is simply the one we are allowed to watch, and that is the scariest part. Many people around the world have seen video of Rick Harrison's breakdown and heard that he was abused in prison. This has led to one question: where is his family? For years, the name Harrison was linked to a close-knit family business, with a father and son working together to make it through the chaos of Las Vegas and even thrive on it. Corey Harrison, Rick's son, was the most important character on Pawn Stars. The way they talked about everyday things was both funny and charming, making viewers feel like they were watching a real family business based on tradition, loyalty, and love. But now that Rick's crimes are public and his physical and mental decline is a hot topic on the internet, that image has been shattered. Corey Harrison didn't make a statement, give an interview, or post anything on social media. At first, there was nothing. Fans thought that Corey might be working on a formal speech, something sincere that would acknowledge the chaos without fully accepting or condemning it. Others thought that Corey was also caught off guard and that his father had kept the worst parts of his life hidden from him. But as the days went by, the rumors got stronger. Was Corey afraid of testifying against himself? Was he working with the police behind the scenes? Was he embarrassed, hurt, or relieved? No one knew, not even his closest friends. An unnamed close friend of the Harrison family said that Corey had stopped talking to them completely after Rick was sentenced. His private social media accounts were closed, and he even sold the house he was living in. It seemed like he wanted to get rid of everything that linked him to his father. Other people noticed that Corey's Instagram, which used to be full of photos from the pawn shop, family events, and Vegas nights, hadn't been updated in months. If you're used to seeing celebrities commenting on even the smallest scandals, Corey's refusal to say anything stood out when TMZ tried to talk to him outside of a Henderson, Nevada, convenience store. The 15-second clip showed Corey quickly walking to his car and saying, "No comment," when asked if he had anything to say about his father's situation in prison. There was a lot of speculation in that space. Online forums were full of ideas. Some people thought Corey was involved in his father's illegal activities. Others thought he might have become a state witness in exchange for immunity. A darker group of people thought he had fully accused Rick and didn't want to deal with the consequences. But amidst all the noise, another question began to surface: is Corey Harrison himself a victim? An anonymous former employee of the pawn shop said that in the years leading up to Rick's arrest, Corey had become less involved with the business. He stopped coming to the shop every day, and Rick took over more tasks. People who used to work for the company said that Corey once asked Rick about the authenticity of a high-value item that was sold behind closed doors. When Corey realized something was wrong, he got very angry. They told him to ignore the fact that the buyer doesn't care if it's real or fake, they're buying a story. Corey may not fully understand what his father did, but people who knew him say that his emotional response to the arrest was raw and immediate. "He cried for hours," a family friend said. "I think he knew part of the truth, but he didn't want to believe the whole picture. When it was finally revealed, it destroyed him." The public's reaction to Corey's silence is a mixed bag. Some fans defended his decision to step away, arguing that he should not be forced to speak about such a complex and personal matter. Others accused him of cowardice, claiming that by not speaking out publicly, he was protecting himself at the cost of transparency. Not only did Corey stay quiet, but Rick's youngest son Jake has also avoided all media attention by not appearing on the show or making any public statements. Rick's ex-wife Kim has also refused to talk to the press. Even Rick's extended family has stayed out of sight, turning down all interview requests and avoiding all media attention. The public is even more interested because of the complete lack of information. When a famous person like Rick Harrison falls, the public wants to react. They want confessions, emotions, and recognition. When none of those things are given, they make up their own stories on online forums, fan pages, and conspiracy threads. People start to argue about not only Rick's crimes, but also what they say about American culture. What does it say when a man who sells historical stories keeps such dark secrets? For a family business that could have been built on charm but fell apart under the weight of silence. Protests broke out outside the History Channel headquarters. Angering former fans wanted to know why the network hadn't looked into Rick's business dealings more when the first rumors came out. Some people, especially those who want to change the way prisons work, saw Rick's fall as a more worrying sign of the prison industrial complex. He wasn't just a famous person losing credibility. At a protest, one activist said, "He's the canary in the coal mine." If this is how they treat someone who is being watched by the whole world, imagine what happens to those we never hear about. At the same time, fast, chaotic, and violent culture moved online as usual. Memes were everywhere. TikTokers dubbed prison scenes with great voiceovers. YouTube users made hour-long videos called Pawn Star or Psychopath. People on Reddit talked about what Rick's actions might mean, who Chester really is, and what secrets may still be hidden. But not everyone was laughing. A smaller part of the internet started to show something different: sadness. There is sadness over the death of a man they used to admire and over the breakup of a family. There is also sadness over the fact that even the most normal and American person could be hiding something dark and unseen beneath the surface. At the center of this pain is Corey Harrison, who is torn between his father's legacy and the truth, between memory and reality, and between who he was and who he could be. If you think this story is interesting, please share your thoughts in the comments. Also, don't forget to like, follow, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next exciting video in this high-stakes series.